Welcome, welcome, welcome to Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and truly excited about today's show in a lot of different ways, a different type of excitement, though, because it's very serious. We have Ms. Dale Standifer, and she's a social worker, and she is a director of a program, Metro Center for Women and Children. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about this Metro Center.
We've been around for about 25 years and basically provide support and counseling services as well as housing for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. Primarily to women and children, but we also offer services to men.
Okay.
And certainly we have a number of young men, children, male children that come in.
Wow. Tell us the extent of the problem in New Orleans.
It's really bad, has been bad. We get about 500 calls a month for either service or information. In many cases, it's not current victimization. It may be a very common call is for an adult to call us and say, I need help. I was abused as a child. I was sexually assaulted as a child, and I'm having a lot of difficulties in my relationships, and what can I do? So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's ongoing.
Right.
The women that we house and children typically are currently being physically abused or threatened.
Wow. How many are you able to house right now?
At a time, 15. We house between 250 and 300 a year, and basically try to get them in, see if they need legal services like a protective order, see if it's so dangerous that we need to relocate them to a different city, try to get the kids in school, provide some stability for them, try to make it as home-like as possible. We do tutoring for the children, try to get them to understand that what's going on is just not their fault and that they can't protect their moms. And also, one of the huge issues is to work with the women on building up their self-esteem. Because in addition to being physically beaten, a lot of times there's a lot of emotional abuse. And it's, you know, you're fat and you're ugly and nobody else is going to want you. And a lot of times they're encouraged to quit their job, so they're financially dependent. So we have a job coach that actually works with the ladies about, you know, can we help you get back in school? What skills do you need? But a lot of it's just to be there and be supportive to them.
Is there a pattern to how, and you mentioned men because it's mostly men on women, but is there a pattern to how men do this?
Well, it's pretty complicated. I think one thing is that 95% of the people that present for services are women. It doesn't mean that there aren't men that are being battered or beaten. Still, there's a lot of inequality in our society. Men earn more money. Typically, they are not the caregivers. It is the women who are the caregivers. Most men are socialized to be more aggressive, learn how to fight, may, in fact, be physically larger, may have more familiarity with weapons and handguns and things like that. Again, I'm generalizing.
That's right. That's right.
And we really do not deal a great deal with the gay community, so those issues would be very different.
Separate, right?
Separate.
That's another issue.
But about 95% of all the people that do ask us for help are females, and most of them have children with them.
So, just within reason, we're dealing, again, not all and every, and we can't totally generalize. You have all kind of different situations, but for the most part, we're dealing with a male issue. And whether female becomes, for the adult part, not talking about the children, child abuse, but we're dealing with men, and men, isolation is a part of how you think?
Sure, sure. Very much like if you were running a prison and you wanted to really keep somebody in line, you'd put them in solitary confinement. It's the same kind of notion. What you want to do is cut your victim off from any source of aid. So, for instance, if I'm not allowed to see my friends or my family, that's losing a source of support for me. Or in many cases, it's like, well, you know, your family's horrible, you need to stay away from them. Or if you want to leave and go see them, fine, but you got to take the kids because I'm not watching the kids. So there's a way of just isolating a person to where the only opinion that she's getting is from him. You know, you're fat, you're ugly, no other guy's ever going to want you, you're a lousy mother. And after a while, it's not just yelling at somebody, it's really kind of stealing their soul and stealing their their feelings that they are worth more than to be somebody else's punching bag. So it's a pretty complex issue, and a lot of times what irritates me is people will say, well, why didn't you just leave? Well, first of all, does she have the emotional wherewithal to leave? Is it smart to leave? Because a lot of these guys will say, if I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. So maybe she's thinking better to be beaten up occasionally than he's going to track me down and kill me. And it's in the news all the time.
That's right.
Where he follows her to work and shoots her and her coworkers and whoever else is around. Right. So, and a lot of times the women just have no place to go, which is why we stay so full. And we try really hard to give them the support and to be nurturing. I'm going to bring up the budget cuts that are facing.
Please, that's right. Yeah, that's actually
right now. We are facing massive cuts by the state through DCFS. I understand that there are money issues. I'm not, living under a rock. I understand that, but to cut services to some of the most vulnerable people in the state just strikes me as extremely inhumane, actually. And what some people have said is, well, shut down the shelters, just put them in hotels. Can you imagine if I called a hotel and said, I need an account, I'm going to be sending scared women and children in the middle of the night and with no means of transportation, no way to get food. Oh, and by the way, there are people out there that want to find them and kill them. Do you really want to, take them in? And I think if we could do it in a sly fashion, they'd soon figure it out. And then what do you do in the middle of the night when a lady hears pounding on her door? Most hotels don't have terrific security. I mean, they're not set up for it. Right. So I think that with the comments they have made about just stick them in hotels is completely insensitive. And where do they get stronger if there's nobody to be there to counsel them or to help them find a job or to make referrals to them for whatever other issues may be going on? So there are about 18 programs in the state, and we're all facing cuts. And it's, in my case, it's about a little bit less than 10% of the budget. But it's a critical 10% because we don't operate with much of a margin.
Right, and I would assume, as you said, you're always full anyway, so that means there are tons of women that need shelters that have nowhere to go.
Right. So I think it's just a sad day in Louisiana that it's come to this, that when you have to make budget cuts, you do it on some of the most vulnerable people in the state.
The most vulnerable people in the state, the women in church. That's the whole point. This concept that where everybody's men have a responsibility because it is men. Statistically, it is men who are abusing the women, men who are abusing the children.
And also men who run the society and are judges and governors and mayors, typically, not always.
Right.
But it's and like I say, most women don't make as much money as a man does for the same work. So it's stacked against them, as it has been for many, many years. And I think it's a shame. We will continue to do everything within our power to provide services some kind of way. And we're banding together as shelters to try to figure out how we can help each other.
Yes.
We always have, but how to do it, more closely.
Right.
Right now, those cuts are not affecting the provision of services to sexual assault victims, but I wouldn't be too surprised if that's not down the road. And in many cases, we're not talking two different populations. Many of the women that come into our shelter will talk about very tragic childhoods and how they married the first guy that came along to get away from their abusive fathers. So it's all interrelated. Sometimes we'll even ask the women, has anybody else ever hurt you? And we get to, well, yeah, my dad used to come in my room at night, and sometimes my brothers, and and so we get this whole horrible situation where some women truly don't think that they're nice men in the world. Men are brutes. So one of the things I'm very proud of is at Metro we have males on staff, and they're going, God, this guy's great. Where'd you find these guys? And I'm saying there are wonderful men all over the world. Just don't think that you have to put up with somebody that's treating you as an object and taking out their anger or their frustration or their kinky sexual urges on your children. I mean, whatever it might be. So I think it's really important for men to stand up and say this is wrong, and I wouldn't want it happening to my own daughter, my own sister, my mother. Right. And luckily, some men are. They really are starting to do that, and I'm very, very happy about that.
Let's talk about, you use the term sexual assault, and it's a real complex term, but what is it?
It's any form of unwanted sexual touching. And that can be because you're a child and you don't understand what's going on. It can be that you're a teenager and you're not old enough to give informed consent.
Right.
It may be asking a woman to do things that she's very uncomfortable to do, different acts. It could be asking her to obtain money for drugs by having sex with other people. It could be flat out prostituting her on the streets. It can be a lot of different things. The effects, surprisingly, are pretty much similar. It's devastating because it's a violation of not only your personality and your spirit and your being, but it's a violation of your body. Yes. And that's very difficult for anybody. I think particularly with young children who are so confused because a lot of times they're actually groomed. Somebody will find a child who doesn't have a father, has a poor home life. Maybe there's domestic violence in the home and the kid's on the street all the time. And they will become a coach or a mentor or a friend and, start out by just simply saying, I want to be your friend. And then, oh, there's this little secret game we need to play that nobody needs to know about. And by the time the child is realizing, I don't like this, they're either so used to, the new iPads and the new clothes and the whatever else they're getting, or they're saying, I don't like this, but at least somebody is paying some attention to me. So it's just really, really sad when it happens to a child because then their sense of trust is completely gone. The world is a bad place and people will hurt you. And mama either can't protect you or won't protect you. Now, of course, it could be that mom is the one hurting you, but that's a little unusual.
It's men.
Typically, sexual assault is almost always men on women or children, or sometimes other men. But
women and children, boys and men, whatever. Let's talk about this child abuse. Tell us typically. I guess it can be all different forms, but again, it's just normally men and let's talk about the children and let's talk about the men themselves.
Well, the research has shown that about half the cases where there's domestic violence, there's also abuse of the children in some way, shape, or form.
Wow.
That once you've decided that it's okay to abuse another human being, why stop with your wife? I have no idea what the rate of prevalence is of child sexual abuse,
right. Yeah,
and I can't speak to anything other than the sexual abuse.
Right.
But as I was thinking earlier, we have 2 groups right now in the Slidell area just for little boys. That's how many are coming through. We're getting people calling about 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds being abused. We hear fairly often people talking about the child is being loaned out for sexual servicing and the parent is getting money for drugs. Or we have a case right now where the mother has filmed the boyfriend having sex with the children to put it on the internet. So it's statistically, I can't tell you how many. I know that we have almost a waiting list. And I know that in the 20 years I've been doing this, the ages are getting younger and younger and younger. The average age for a girl to enter prostitution is 13. And it's almost always because she's run away from an abusive home, finds herself in the street, she's vulnerable, she doesn't really understand what's going on. She finds a boyfriend who agrees to take care of her, and then after a while he says, well, it's time now that you kind of took care of me a little bit. And that's how it starts. And even if a child in that circumstance would call the police, chances are they'd be arrested for prostitution, which they're not even old enough to consent to have sex. So it's a very strange kind of a combination. But I just know that I have seen people blossom with enough support and become strong and find their voice and get out of these situations and get their kids out of these situations. But it's rare to find somebody that can do it completely on their own. So I think it's really important that there are social workers and counselors and pastors and police officers and all kinds of people who are supportive to the women and understand the struggles that they go through just trying to keep them and their kids safe.
You had mentioned something earlier. I just want to bring it up as you're there. Legalistic could be even religiously legalistic, but these strong, defined legalistic, you do what I say, I have control over you, that lens.
Well, they kind of, it comes in with rigid sex roles.
Right.
I'm the man, I'm the provider, you're the woman, shut up and cook. Or the old barefoot and pregnant kind of thing. A lot of times, too, women are afraid to call the police. And in some communities, when they do call the police, it almost makes it worse. I've worked with men who were abusive, and I've actually had them tell me when I heard the sirens, I just scratched myself, so that when the police came in, I could say, well, I was just defending myself. Look at her, she's hysterical. And if the police aren't caring and understanding domestic violence, they're not going to figure out who the primary aggressor was and who the victim was. In some cases, they arrest them both. And so by the time she's been through that experience, and maybe child protection has the kids, she will never, ever call. Or even now, right now, we're having Hispanic women who will tell us, you know, I'm not here legally. And they told me that the laws of this country don't apply to me. And if I call the police, I will be deported and they'll take away my kids. So obviously, we're trying to combat that and saying, no. First of all, we don't care if you're legal or illegal. We know that you're a person that needs help.
You're human.
You're human. And humans shouldn't be treating other humans like that. And particularly not what should be their most cherished, you know, people in their lives, their wives and their children. So.
Men. Biological and non-biological, step versus biological. Are there any differences?
I think there's probably, and again, I'm not a researcher, but my experience would show that there's less taboo about it not being your own biological child.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that there aren't some biological fathers who abuse, you know, their children. But I think a lot of times what happens is a woman, say a woman's in an abusive relationship,
right,
and she leaves, and she's got 2 or 3 kids, and the best she can do is get a job at a fast food place.
Right.
And so she's desperate. She's desperate financially. And along comes Prince Charming.
Got it.
And he says, I love you, I'm going to take care of you, and oh, your kids are wonderful. Maybe really what he was going after were the kids to begin with.
Wow.
And he sees a vulnerable woman, and he says, well, I'll babysit the kids, I'll do whatever. And then either the mom isn't around enough to know what's going on, or in some cases is aware of what's going on and just feels helpless to change it. And or says, you know, I'm really sorry this is happening. It happened to me and I survived. So you get into these really sick kind of situations. The other thing is not only the biological versus non-biological, but you get all this movement of families. So whereas it used to be maybe you could go to an aunt or an uncle or grandmother, particularly after Katrina, a lot of extended families are just gone. Or they're not close enough to say, you know, daughter, I see something happening with you. What's going on? And so, and some people even, I mean, I know I lost my church, closed. So a lot of the supports that may have been there aren't there, and a lot of it just has to do with mobility, people moving all over the country. So all of these things kind of contribute to people being isolated, not having access to the help they need.
Men, because we're dealing with, again, 95% men on children, 95% men on women. Let's talk about this type of man. You had mentioned earlier about they have some tests or whatever to determine men that are more likely pedophiles.
Let's just deal with the sexual abuse first.
Okay.
There are very fancy names for it, but some tests that have been used, actually usually in prison, because that's one place that, at least in the old days, you could actually do things like that.
Right.
What they'll do is they'll show a picture, say out of Playboy or Hustler, one of those magazines, and they measure the level of arousal. And if they get a guy who's not aroused, and then they show a 12-year-old, male or female, not aroused, and then they get to where it's a 5-year-old, and they're starting to get aroused, or, God forbid, it's an infant, and they're totally aroused. That's how they go about determining who might benefit from counseling and who won't. You can't counsel somebody out of that which is in their basic nature. You just can't do it. So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but that's a case of not just the children are vulnerable, but it may be they just like children and would not be able to enjoy sexual activity with a member of someone of their own age, whether it's male or female. So that's, I think, a very sad prognosis for those particular children in those circumstances.
Okay. New Orleans, you know, people come from all over the world for sex, you know, Bourbon Street.
Sex, fun, partying,
exactly.
Mardi Gras.
Tons of alcohol.
Anything goes.
The supercharged drinks and the alcohol, that's crazy. What do you think about that in the context of the sexual abuse and everything else like that?
I don't know about with sexual abuse. I think it, obviously people who are intoxicated, their judgment is impaired. And there may be, and I can't prove this, but increased numbers of date rapes, acquaintance rapes, things like that. Well, I just got drunk and, you know, I really don't remember what I did, like that fan that got, you know, was molested by somebody. Right. I don't know about the sexual abuse of children, but certainly I think rape goes up wherever you have a situation where anything goes. And then you have the other thing too, like at Mardi Gras with people getting flashed, people flashing them. Right. And to a great extent the police officers look the other way. It's just too much of it going on. So I'm surprised that we weren't the ones that, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas or something. Yeah. I think it's pretty much like that in New Orleans. Right. What I wouldn't do in my rural town in Iowa, I feel very comfortable in going to New Orleans and just letting it all hang out. Yeah. So I think, too, it puts a strain on our police department because they're having to deal with these large influx of people and rowdy behavior, right, and maybe don't have as much time to investigate rapes and assaults and domestic violence.
Well, I think we did. Let's kind of touch upon this idea of informed consent, sexual assault and informed consent, to the point where the male thinking is, well, she's dressed like that, so therefore, and the women are saying, well, what did I do to, that right, maybe I created that, I provoked,
well, let me back up a little bit. First of all, I think in the state of Louisiana, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think 17, it's either 17 or 18 would be the age of informed consent. All right. If you had your full faculties, right, with you. Right. If you're drunk, you're impaired, and you can't do that. But I think that one of the issues is that when people are taught by the media, I'm going to pick on the media, right, and magazines to look like film stars, right, when they're 3 and 4, and who's the Honey Boo Boo, and the beauty pageants and all this with the makeup. When children are sexualized early, right, and they like the attention that they're getting because they look grown up, right, a lot of guys aren't going to say, I want to see your ID. I want to know absolutely that you're legally old enough to be able to consent to this. Mm-hmm. In fact, there have been some sting operations, I think in Kenner, okay, where police officers have posed as young girls. Okay. So that's another issue. And then the other issue is rape. Flat-out rape is usually not about sex. It's about power and control, and I want to hurt you because I hate women or whatever, but I'm going to hurt you in a very personal and very degrading way. Right. Most of the particularly stranger rapes that I've dealt with, there was some aspect of humiliation. I'm going to rape you and rip off your clothes and leave you in the middle of the street, or urinate on you, or whatever. And it's about rage, and it's about power and control. Again, this is a very complicated subject, but right, there are some people who are just insecure, right, and they say, well, I can't get a girl any other way, okay, and this is what I'm going to do. Right. You go from that all the way to the ones who say, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to enjoy torturing them to death. I mean, they are just off the charts. Those are the sociopaths that there's really, women should have good judgment. They should watch how much they drink. Particularly watch the possibility of date rape drugs being slipped in on them. Travel in pairs, We've had about 4 in the last few months, women who had a little bit too much to drink called a cab and were accosted by the cab drivers, who you would think would not do that. So there's some basic safety things, but if a person is hell-bent on assaulting you, they're probably going to be able to figure out a way to do it. So, self-defense isn't the answer either. That may enrage them to the point where they go ahead and kill you. So it's a real touchy situation, and it's really not what can the victim do to not be victimized. It's how can we hold perpetrators accountable to not, roam the streets looking for victims.
Well, I guess, and believe me, I'm with you there. I guess the point is that society has seemed to give men a pass to do whatever they want to do. As if they have, as if women should say, if a woman says no, it means no. Right. Period. Just,
well, again, it's like chattel. It's like objects. Right. The women's movement grew out of the civil rights movement. Right. That whole thing that everybody has human, dignity. Right. Right. You shouldn't own another human being.
That's right.
And so the women's movement really got on the tail end of the civil rights movement. Yeah. But there are still people who feel entitled. She's just a woman. She's my property. It is my responsibility to chastise her. There's some very old-fashioned notions. We've had pastors that have beaten their wives holding a Bible in one hand and lifting verses out of the Bible that are...
shall obey.
Yeah, that kind of thing. The man is the head of the household and spare the rod and spoil the child, that kind of... But they're taking them out of context. Right. If you read the next verse, you would realize, treat this woman... Yeah, what about love? What
God
about
is love.
Real
simple stuff.
But it's easy for them to justify doing it because in their own mind, they're... Here's a good example. If I've had a really bad day at the office, really bad, and I come home and I see the dog sitting there, and I'm angry, I kick the dog, right? Because it's just a dog. Okay. But if I come home and I say, that's Fluffy, That's Fluffy.
Yeah.
Do I really want to hurt Fluffy?
Yeah.
No, I have to think that he's an object before I can hurt him. Same thing with any kind of crime. You know, I don't care if you're a good person, I'm going to shoot you because I like your watch.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is. Yeah. So I think one of the things is you have to objectify that which you're fixing to hurt because of your rage issues.
Right.
And the way you do that, I mean, you hear things like the baby mama. You know, don't call her by her name, the bitch, you know, whatever it is.
Right.
So it's a way of saying she's not a human being.
Right.
And therefore it doesn't really matter how I treat her.
Right.
And the sad part is after a while, the victims start feeling like they're really not human beings either. They're just somebody's punching bag.
I think that's the point. I think so powerfully that people, we hope that they hear that people have value. Children have value. Children have value. We have a minute left, but I want to touch upon this again. You know, with the internet and again Bourbon Street and so forth, we've created this highly sexualized, pornographic society.
Yeah, you can pretty much, from what I understand, you can pretty much order children off the internet. That you have to do it in sort of a careful way, but you can determine that you would like to have a certain type of sexual experience with a certain type of child, and it can be arranged. And the fact that children are now able to look at pornography without, you know, going down and swiping a copy of Playboy, they just go in their computer. And there's violent pornography too. It's bad. But there's help out there, and I hope people reach out and get it.
And but society has to support through finances, cash, money, support the organization, not budget cuts. There's nothing, not a road is more important, not a street light is more important than helping the women and the children. And what do we have to do? March, jump up and down, scream, shout. Every legislator, every city council member, anybody who's in any position, how can we cut when this is going on right here in the city of New Orleans when we're allowing billboards to sit at Bourbon Street? This is nuts. Do what we can. Thank you. Fight as hard as you can. Appreciate you.
You made it really easy. Thanks.
You made it easy. What an awesome.